It was a late July night in 2019, and I had just finished a double shift at the diner when I decided to take the long way home through Riverside Park to clear my head. I remember the exact time because my phone said 11:47 and the city clock on Elm Street blinked 23:47 in yellow numbers. The path was one I had walked 100 times. Cracked concrete, the same graffiti on the low wall, the metal bench by the playground where couples sometimes sat. I thought I knew every sound that belonged to that park the way I knew the layout of my own apartment. That night felt ordinary until it did not. The air smelled of humid grass and engine oil, like the end of a long summer shift. I had my keys between my fingers the way I always did, for comfort more than defense, and I hummed a song under my breath to fill the silence. Then a single sharp sound sliced through the hum of crickets and distant tires. Somebody tapped the slide twice from the inside, short and deliberate. I stopped. My heartbeat skidded into a faster lane. I kept walking because at first I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Later, I would wish I had run the other way the moment the sound came. I am telling you this from my own memory. This happened to me and to the people I was with, and I am not an investigator, only someone who lived it. The park was quieter than usual because it was a weekday, but there were signs of life. A food truck still warm with grease, a spray of laughter from a bus stop 3 blocks away, a dog walker clipping along the perimeter. I met up with Sarah and Luis near the fountain, their faces lit by the soft spill of light from an old lamppost. Sarah was carrying a paper cup with the logo of the diner on it, a habit from working the same late shift crew. And Luis kept tapping his phone screen like he was trying to speed up the walk. Behind them came Emma and Tony, arguing quietly about something trivial, Tony gesturing with his hands in that way he always did when he wanted to make a point. There was also Jake, who had a flashlight in his jacket pocket and liked to joke about being our lookout for nothing in particular. I named them because they were there, because their names matter in memory. The bench by the playground had its usual split in the wood, and the metal plaque that had been there since the park was renovated in 2014. The high beams from passing cars thrown across the path made the puddles glitter. The smell of fried dough lingered near the truck. My palms felt both clammy and oddly steady from the long shift. We fell into the routine of joking, of recounting small defeats and small wins at work. And for a while, the park felt like the quiet center that held us together. Then Tony stopped mid-sentence, his voice lowering. "Did you hear that?" he asked. It was the first audible break from our safe rhythm. The initial incident was almost laughable until it was not. At first, we thought it was a loose branch, or a raccoon, or one of the teenagers messing around by the slides. The sound came again, a hollow knock and a whisper that seemed to curl out of the metal tunnel of the slide itself. "Hey." My skin prickled, not because the word was loud, but because it felt misplaced, like a radio station appearing in the wrong city. We walked toward the playground together, flashlights cutting cones into the dark. I peered into the slide and saw only the slick gleam of plastic and the smeared shadow where light faded. No footprints, no scrap of clothing, no sign that anyone had been inside recently. Robust dialogue passed between us in short, sharp exchanges meant to steady nerves. "There is no one there," Jake said, voice brisk. "Maybe a kid dared someone," Sarah replied, but her voice had a thinness to it. "Who would dare this late?" Lewis asked. "Maybe a drunk," Tony said, trying to make humor work as armor. I asked aloud, "Did you all hear a voice?" And we listened to each other breathing. Silence held for a moment longer than felt natural, and then the slide whispered again, softer, almost a breath. "Come down." The sound felt like a hand pressing my chest. I felt foolish for feeling afraid, but my body did not lie. The park that had been a familiar route turned alien in a single sentence. We tried to be rational. We checked with light and phone flash, sweeping the slide, the tunnel, behind the bushes where someone could be hiding. Emma moved a branch aside with her fingers and found nothing but dew. "It is empty," she said with deliberate calm. We tested every plausible explanation like scientists in a strange lab. Maybe the sound bounced from the metal, I offered, because a reasonable explanation is a salve. Maybe someone is messing with speakers, Tony suggested. Jake knelt and ran his flashlight along the ground. No footprints, he said, his breath visible in the beam. The sky had a faint cloud cover that made the lampposts look fuzzed, and the smell of the fountain water mixed with the greasy sweetness of the truck. My fingertips felt chilled despite the heat. The incidents multiplied in my mind. The slide voice, a shadow that did not belong to the trees, a slow set of footsteps that seemed to match our pace and then fall behind. Every time we tried to catch the source, the park retreated a little more into its own dark corners. This was the first moment when the night stopped making sense and started making demands. We argued about leaving, about calling someone, about staying together, and that argument grew louder until we realized the trade-off. Leave and risk running into whoever had been there, or stay and risk letting them close the distance. We decided to split up to search the park anyway, because complaint and motion felt better than paralytic fear. I remembered the sequence of voices like a broken chorus as we tried to cover more ground. "Check the gazebo," Sarah told Lewis. "I will go by the basketball courts," Jake offered. "I can look near the parking lot," Tony said. "Cover the path behind the fountain," Emma said to me. "No one goes alone," I replied, and we tried to keep that promise even while stepping out of sight of each other. The exchanges were quick, nervous, and repeated. "You okay?" "Yeah?" "Call if you see anything." "Keep the flashlight on." There were 8 or 9 of those short talkbacks as we moved. The park breathed differently now. The smell of wet leaves grew stronger. The concrete felt slick underfoot, and I could feel a pressure behind my eyes like a headache coming on. My hands found a cold piece of metal rail, and I ran my thumb along its rim to ground myself. At some point, while checking behind a row of hedges, I heard a whisper that used my name. It was not loud. It was not necessary to be loud. It was precise. Mark. I froze. My pulse thudded in my throat. I want to take a beat here to tell you a little about me, because what I was like before that night matters to how I reacted and how this memory sits inside me now. I grew up in a household where doors were left unlocked and neighbors borrowed sugar without asking. In a neighborhood where you left your keys on the kitchen table and someone would clap to catch your attention across the yard. I worked nights throughout college and learned to read people by small tells, the lift of a shoulder, the tension in a smile, the way someone shifts weight on a foot. I had a routine of walking routes at odd hours because my work schedule demanded it and because I liked the solitude. I am cautious by habit, not by fear. I trusted sound the way some trust a map. I had a few embarrassing moments of being overly suspicious, like the time I called out to a cat that turned out to be a shoeshine bin, but mostly my instincts had kept me out of trouble. That background is 850 characters of the truth that I will not omit. It explains why I did not run screaming the instant something felt off. It explains the choice to search rather than flee. It explains why I remember small details the way someone remembers every turn of a long road. I was trained by life to look for cause, to document oddities, to keep a steady voice. That training also made me believe that strange things usually had mundane roots. That belief cracked that night. The escalation came in a dozen small pushes rather than one cinematic reveal. A flashlight flickered and died, as if swatted. A bicycle bell rang when nobody was near a bike. And then the footsteps began again, but this time they matched our pace exactly, even when we changed speed. We tried more dialogue, longer this time, to buy time and to test reactions. "Who are you?" I called. My voice edged because we had realized the pattern, and that realization had teeth. "We are not alone," Sarah added quickly. "Show yourself," Luis demanded, voice higher than he meant. A shadow shifted near the tennis courts, and something that might have been a figure wore a hood and stood like a statue between 2 lampposts. "Hello," the figure said, in a voice that was almost human and almost not. The exchange that followed lasted longer, A thread of questions and pressure, 8 or 9 back and forths, as we tried to coax information and the figure refused to give any. "Where do you live?" Emma asked. "What do you want?" Tony pushed. The answer was calm, a monotone that seemed to come from a mouth just behind a mask. "Watch." It was not a threat exactly, but it carried the weight of command. That word made the night tilt. The first extended moment of terror is worth slowing for a second because memory does not like to be measured when fear compresses time. We were at the south side of the park beneath a single lamp that buzzed like an old refrigerator. The hooded figure stood 20 paces away, hands in pockets, face obscured. Our dialogue stretched to 10 exchanges between the 5 of us, each line a shard. "We can call the police," I said. "They will take forever," Luis countered. "Maybe they are just drunk," Sarah tried. "Maybe not," Jake said, his voice thin. "I am not going to play games," the figure said once, then only watched. The way it watched felt like a ledger where each of our movements was recorded and calculated. My palms were sweaty enough to make the flashlight beam smear when I tried to steady it. I could taste metal at the back of my throat, like blood, though nothing had cut me. The lamp's light warmed my skin, but made the darkness beyond it look denser. For 500 to 600 characters here, I lived the slow hush of breath, the clammy fabric of fear, the ticking of a clock that had stopped in all the wrong places. When the figure took one step, our nerves unspooled and the chase began. The chase was ugly and messy in the way panic makes neat plans dissolve. We ran in a cluster, directions chosen by instinct rather than strategy. Hiding felt like sitting inside a drum with the sound of footsteps beating the shell. We ducked behind the maintenance shed, breath hot and fast, our lungs burning like iron. "Hide," I hissed. "Get down," Sarah said. "Stay quiet," Tony added in a whisper that trembled. The stranger circled with a patience that felt deliberate, like someone pacing to a metronome. At one point, there was a muffled shout, "Police!" from a distance. Not enough of a promise to change our plan, but enough to loosen the stranger's confidence for a beat. We exchanged urgent, clipped lines in the darkness, 8 or 9 back and forths, as each of us tried to keep fear from turning into motion that would give us away. My hands found the cool chain link of a back fence. My fingers smelled of sweat and the faint oil from the bench where I had rested earlier. I felt foolishly alive and small at once. We pushed through a side gate marked with the word "gate" in faded letters and tumbled into the street like spilled marbles, scattering in different directions. Somebody banged on Mrs. Delgado's door because her porch light was the only safe reach. She opened and let us in without asking questions, only a look that was equal parts alarm and old neighborly duty. She handed us cold water and wrapped a wool blanket around my shoulders without touching my face. Her kindness was an anchor. After the immediate flight, we tried to make sense of the night. We called the police. Officer Ramirez took our statements, and I still remember the way he flipped his notepad with methodical calm. We described the figure, the voice, the sequence. The technical check was quick and concise. We asked the park office to pull security footage, and they pulled 3 hours of grainy video from an older camera that faced the playground. The footage showed shadows and headlights and nothing definitive. Just a blur that could be a person or a trick of light. The official recording and the camera check took less than 300 characters worth of procedural action, but left a residue of frustration. Technology had limits, and memory had holes. Officer Ramirez said they would patrol the area more often, and Mrs. Delgado promised to put her light on every night she was home. We left a formal report that night, and a week later there were 2 more similar reports from other parts of the neighborhood. Same time window, same indistinct descriptions. The police logged them as related calls, but with no suspect detained. Community reaction came fast and messy. The neighbor group chat lit up with questions and advice, with 8 different people chiming in by name and action. Michael from apartment 3 posted a grainy still he had taken earlier in the week and said he had noticed a hooded figure near the parking lot at 2 in the morning. Priya from the bakery texted that she had heard a similar voice while locking up. Tom, who walks his dog every night, said he had followed someone to the park bench and then lost the silhouette in the trees. Mrs. Delgado, who had sheltered us, asked for the group to check on elderly neighbors. Emma's sister called and insisted we stay with her for a night. Each person added a little pressure, a little context, and a little more fear. I listed names because they mattered: Michael, Priya, Tom, Mrs. Delgado, Officer Ramirez, Emma, Jake. Each reaction changed the shape of the event from a private scare to something communal. The park no longer belonged only to us. It belonged to a rumor that could swell later. I want to break down 2 extended moments of tension because they show what fear does to time and decisions. First, when we confronted the figure near the tennis courts and the word "watch" slipped out of its mouth, I felt the world shrink. For 500 to 600 characters, I remember heartbeats counted like drum beats, the rough scrape of my sneaker on gravel, the taste of smoke from the distant food truck, and the cold flash of moonlight on my cheek. We traded lines, trying to bargain with the unknown. "What do you mean, watch?" I asked. The figure only tilted its head and did not answer. The silence that followed was worse than any explanation. Second, when we hid by the maintenance shed and the stranger circled slowly, the fear felt like a physical weight pressing on my shoulders. I could hear every small sound: our breathing, a moth hitting the lamp, the creak of loose siding. For another 500 to 600 characters, my mind rehearsed escape routes and failed them in sequence, each plan dissolving when confronted by the stubborn reality of a person who seemed to know our moves. Those moments are slow in memory and fast when you try to speak them. They taught me what it is to be watched and not to see the watcher. About a third of the way through the night, I felt the urge to reach out to you, the listener, and ask something simple. If you were in my place, what would you have done? I know many people here have felt the same hair on the back of the neck, the sense of being measured by a presence that does not belong. Pause for a second and think of the last time you felt followed or heard a voice where none should be. If you would run, type "I would run." If you would stay and confront, type "I would stay." If you have a quick line about your own night in a park, drop it in the comments. We read them and learn, and sometimes your small detail sheds light on what happened to someone else. Many of you have already written in about streetlights that fail and footsteps that match your own, and those short messages have helped more than you know because they create a pattern. Now, back to that night and what happened when we left Mrs. Delgado's porch and the police did their rounds. The weeks that followed were an odd mixture of mundane life and sharp recurring fear. We updated our routes, we moved in groups, and we stopped taking Riverside Park after dark. Friends checked in with texts named by literal comfort. "You okay? Did you sleep? Coffee tomorrow?" People who had shrugged at our story at first later admitted they had seen similar things and had not said anything because they did not want to sound alarmist. The social fallout spread through 8 named people who all reacted differently. Sarah stopped taking the late shift at the diner. Louis bought a second flashlight and attached it to his keyring. Emma began attending a self-defense class with Tom. Jake drove us home more nights than he had before. Tony started sleeping with the porch light on. Officer Ramirez increased patrols, and the park posted a notice about safety and to report suspicious activity. Some neighbors installed brighter lights, and a local radio station ran a story that included a blurred clip from the security camera. Each action was a small attempt to restore order. I will not pretend everything became neat after a police report. The investigation did not yield firm answers. The footage stayed grainy. Witness statements varied in small details as memory does. The detective who called, Detective Alvarez, was polite and methodical but honest in his uncertainty. He told us that without clearer footage or a suspect, there was little they could do beyond patrols and community outreach. We were left with partial facts and a lot of feelings. We tried to be practical. We pulled what little evidence we had, compared notes for inconsistencies, and asked the town to replace a camera with a higher resolution model. The technical explanation of our attempts to get data and improve surveillance was concise. We filed requests, the Parks Department swapped a camera, and footage after the swap showed no intrusions, but the period of interest remained fogged. That procedural description fits into a few sentences, but the emotional weight of unanswered questions hung heavier. The consequences of that night stretched beyond my immediate fear. It changed routines and reputations. The park was quieter for a month as people adjusted, and the rumor cooled. At work, gossip flavored shifts, and people asked with a worried edge if I would be okay walking home. I found that small kindnesses and small fears can rearrange a neighborhood. 5 to 8 named people who had been indifferent became protective, each doing a small ritual that warded off some anxiety. Sarah asked if I would ride home with her. Louis called to make sure I turned on my porch light. Mrs. Delgado knocked 3 times before letting me in whenever I walked past. Those actions were meaningful and practical. The immediate social consequence was an extra layer of community vigilance. The epilogue of time is where the story stretches and reshapes itself into memory. 1 month after the incident, we had collected a handful of similar reports from other parts of town, and the park had a new camera that gave grainier but clearer images. The change in camera helped us for detail, but did not give us a face. I remember the first morning a month later when I walked by the park at dawn and felt odd at how normal everything looked. The fountain gurgled the same way, the bench had the same graffiti, and there was a little more litter than before. I walked slower that day and met Tony, who was carrying coffee. He offered a cup, and we stood by the empty playground talking about nonsense to prove to ourselves that the park was not an enemy. 3 months later, the pattern had shifted into a rumor with less heat. Some people stopped mentioning it, others still avoided the route, and the police logged fewer calls. I went back once at twilight with Jake and Emma to test myself, to see if the fear had a physical anchor. We sat on the bench, lights overhead, and we watched a kid race down the slide without incident. The sight felt like a small repair to a torn fabric. 6 months later, the park felt smaller but no less ordinary, and yet a trace remained in me. I took different shifts sometimes, I paid more attention when I heard a step behind me, and I learned to trust a sudden tensing more than before. The 6-month mark taught me that memory does not undo itself, it layers. Each return to the place made me more cautious and, oddly, more grateful for the way strangers looked out for one another afterwards. I do not have a tidy ending. The hooded figure was never identified. The camera footage never gave us a face. The police kept the report open for a time, but eventually closed it as unsolved pending new evidence. The community carried on with a little more light in some places and a little less comfort in others. I still walk past Riverside Park sometimes during the day and feel a small shiver of what happened, and I tell new friends the story so it does not sit only inside me. If you live near a park, look out for one another, trust small instincts, and report what you see. If you want me to dig deeper into this case or to check similar reports in other neighborhoods, leave a note and I will follow up. For now, I keep my keys between my fingers, I notice sounds I used to ignore, and I remember that ordinary nights can tilt into something else on a single word. If you were there, what would you have done? Share with us below. If you want more, subscribe and I will keep looking into what hides in plain sight. What our streets do not want us to see. Remember this, when the night quietly tells you to watch, sometimes the only safe thing is to listen and to tell someone else what you heard.